Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the wonderful movie The Featherweight with director Robert Kolodny, along with actor and producer James Madio and cast members Ruby Wolfe and Keir Gilchrist. And Robert, I wanted to start with you because I love the fact that you were working on a boxing documentary in Bulgaria when this kind of came across your table, so to speak. And that when you were looking at the script and the idea of this story, that it meant that you felt like you really just instantly knew who these characters were, but also the idea of verite documentary filmmaking and how that could fold into this story. And I was curious how your experience making that documentary and working on it for several years really influenced the way that you've told this story.
Yeah, wonderful question. I always wanted to make fiction narrative films, and I kind of accidentally fell into the world of observational nonfiction, and that experience sort of culminated with the idea of me directing this boxing documentary about Serafim Todorov, Bulgarian boxer. And so I was going back and forth to Bulgaria for 4 years or so, spending time in boxing gyms and sort of becoming enamored really with the personality of sort of the sorrowful pugilist, the crooked manager, the kind of tough trainer, and the textures of the spaces in which they occupy the boxing gym. There's just these textures and smells, and it's such a rich canvas. And so when the screenplay that Steve Loff penned came across my desk, it just felt like a perfect match for me. The story of Willie Pep, and the people in his life. It just felt dramatic in a way with nuance and beauty, and I was really excited to jump into that world.
I love that. And James, for you, your I believe your dad at one point had said years ago you should play Willie Pep at some point in your life. And so you spent several years always having a picture of him up in dressing rooms. And so when you started working with Steve Luff, the writer of this, and developing this story, I was very interested in that experience of taking something that had just been an idea at the back of your mind for so many years and then getting the chance to turn it into reality and seeing how you were actually going to capture this character once you got the chance to do so.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mark. At first, our rendition, our idea of this was to, have me at 18 years old and have me at like 40 years old, with to come back and do this project over 3 decades. And I say it a lot. It's only like three directors that can do that, and that's Scorsese and Coppola and Spielberg. And so we were going out to Hollywood trying to raise $40 million as James Madio as the lead in this, 3 decade period piece. So that wasn't going over well. So we tailored expectations, and then we came up with this new approach. And the approach was, what if? What if a film crew came upon Willie Pep in the 1960s, knocked on his door, and did the old, "Where are you now today, Willie?" And for Willie, it was an opportunity to get back into the spotlight. He was already thinking about a comeback, but for the documentary team, it's an amazing time for the juicy lifestyle, which is he's back home living with his mother. He's on his fourth wife. He's got no money. His father's ill. His son has a drug problem. So that's when we come upon Willie, and that's when we sort of start our story.
I love it. And Ruby, in talking about the way that you've captured Linda, I love how much forthrightness there is in her. The fact that she's very much set about doing things on her terms. When they got married, she talks about how I was never going to go live with my mother-in-law and learn how to cook and be the perfect housewife and stay-at-home wife for him. And I was just interested in how those details in the script and who she was as a person really shaped so much of your performance.
That's actually so funny that you bring up that specific anecdote because that actually is unscripted. That anecdote about Linda saying that she didn't want to learn to cook Italian food. So my mother actually was raised in a town called Manchester, which is about a 5-10 minute drive outside of Hartford, Connecticut, in the 1960s. And her aunt married a man who was in the Hartford Italian American community. And when they got married, he said, "I'll marry you, but on the condition that you have to go and stay with my parents, and they will teach you how to cook Italian food for an Italian man." And so when I got this role, Rob would do this exercise where he would sort of roll camera for 5 to 10 minutes before we would go into a scene, or sometimes for like interstitial or B-roll material to help with the documentary conceit. And he would sort of interview us. And I thought that this was stuff that would hit the cutting room floor. I didn't expect it to become so foundational to the actual film that we created. And that was just a story that I told as Linda that actually happened to my great aunt because it felt so textural and so specific. But it was interesting how, you know, you had the character on the page, and then through these improvisations and these explorations of character that were sort of guided by Rob, you would discover things about the people that you were building. And I had a lot more like artistic license than I think Keir or Jimmy, because Linda is sort of an amalgamation of all of Willie Pep's real wives. She's not necessarily like a true direct one-to-one with the actual Linda Papaleo. So I had a lot of like creative license and liberty. And so if I said that, you know, she refused to go learn to cook Italian food in the way that Willie wanted her to, then that became canon. And that was kind of exciting. Those little fictional things that got sort of brought into the story that I think kind of built the world and made a lot of rich texture for all of us to really play with.
It's such a great moment and such a great line, and I love that backstory of it. And Keir, on the opposite end to Ruby's experience, you really had the opportunity to meet Billy, who is Willie Pep's son, and spend time with him and kind of study his mannerisms and see how he spoke about his father. And I was very curious in how that time spent with him and just getting to study him so closely really lent into your performance and the way that you've shaped this.
Yeah, so it was my first time I've ever had that opportunity. And initially, I really wasn't sure if I wanted to do it or not. And and it was very much presented like, if you want, you can meet him, but maybe it's not important. And like, obviously, I think there's always the danger of like, am I gonna turn out like this? Is this gonna turn into an impersonation? And so I didn't want that, but I more so, when I met him, you know, a little bit of like his accent and stuff, I was like, okay, right. And just Hartford in general. But then there was also just, you know, again, mainly asking him about his dad, how he still feels about him now, asking him about where he was at that time period in the 60s and like where his, you know, he was thankfully also very open about his past with drug addiction, which would have been fair if he didn't want to talk about it as well. But yeah, he was like very honest about his life at that time and what he was doing to like be able to score drugs. And, you know, I got a real sense of how even to this day, you know, he lives somewhat in his father's shadow, who in Hartford is still, you know, everyone in Hartford knows Willie Pep. I mean, everybody we interacted with was like, oh my God, you guys are doing that movie. So I was able to like get a good sense of who he was without impersonating him, hopefully.
No, it's wonderful. And Robert, in the way that you've told this story, I love how you've captured the documentary feel. Like literally when I hit play, I thought this was supposed to be a narrative for a couple of minutes at the beginning. And I love that you kind of created a backstory for yourself in playing the director within the film that you were directing alongside your brother, who's the cinematographer, and that the two of you would kind of like go back and forth in these characters before you would start shooting with the cast and the improv scenes that Ruby was mentioning. And I wanted to ask about how creating that backstory for yourself as a director and working with the cast in that way really helped to capture that verite and the way that we see it.
Yeah, you know, it's an unconventional way of making a movie, asking an actor to sort of subvert all of their experience and training and, you know, look at the camera, spike the lens, talk to me. It's really antithetical, I think, to the craft that an actor practices every day. So I thought it was only right to develop a real scene partner that the actors could work with, so it's not this like totally bizarre othered thing. So my brother Adam and I came up with fictional biographies of the Zupan brothers, Herman and Murray, loosely based on the personas of Albert and David Maysles. And I hope that it added a little bit of humanity for the actors while they were in character. Like Ruby said, we did a lot of these improvisational exercises where, you know, I would speak directly to the characters, and therefore I should be in character myself. It shouldn't be like Featherweight director Robert Kolodny saying to fictionalized character Billy Papaleo, like, hey, what's going on? Where's your dad? It should be like 1960s documentarian Herman Zupan speaking to his subject in his film. And, this is just another facet of trying to imbue the picture with as much authenticity as possible, which is something that we unilaterally attempted to do throughout all of the departments. It also goes without saying that I'm completely obsessed with direct cinema and cinema verite, and really overly fetishize the idea of how these films function rhythmically and in terms of narrative storytelling. And so when you watch enough of these, and you watch enough D.A. Pennebaker movies, oh, that's that thing that Penny always does, or oh, I hear that voice. Or when you're watching Salesman or Grey Gardens and you hear Al Mazel's voice, you're like, oh, nice, sorry, sweet. I've been waiting for that moment where we hear Al speak. And it's part of the craft and indicative of the time period. So it just furthers the idea that it should feel real, not a facsimile of something from the past, but really the genuine article.
And for the rest of you, how did having Robert kind of in this character of director and really playing with you as a scene partner help, especially when it came to those improvisational moments as you were getting ready and kind of gearing into the scenes with him?
Would you like me to go first?
Yeah, sure.
I'd love that.
Well, first off, to see Ruby and Keir, I miss you guys. And I'm just so glad that you were a part of this, and we could all celebrate this. So I thank you both. You guys look great. There was a lot of sort of freedom, I say a lot, to explore the character, the freedom on the set to move around. It's a little different to not have to worry about your mark or hit your light. You can move, you can bump into camera, you can spike the lens like Robert said. It's something that naturally as an actor, if you're doing it for so long, it's something that you don't do or want to do or don't lean into. So when someone tells you you can lean into that, there's questions, right? Well, would you be here? Would I have a camera here? I'm arguing with my son. My father's passing away. I'm with my wife sitting on the couch. It's a slightly intimate thing. And so you would go to Robert and say, how are you going to, shoot this? What's the line? What's the fine line? And he would explain it lovely. He would protect us in every kind of way possible. But I had a lot of fun doing it. There was a lot of freedom, and it was this beautiful mix of theater and film, and it was new to me, so I embraced it.
I think I had sort of a different entry point in, because this was my first movie. So unlike Keir and Jimmy and a lot of the other cast members, I didn't have, all of these things in my head that were you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. So there was less red tape for me to sort of have to psychologically cut through in order to be able to spike the lens, because I have less experience being told not to do those things. That being said, I think because I came into this having a close collaborative relationship with Rob prior to this project, it was a real boon, I think, to the performance to have him being my scene partner in those confessional interview style, talking head scenes for Linda, because when Linda is starting to get a sense that the film crew is maybe a group of people closer in age, all artistic types that she maybe has more in common with than her own husband. There is a very natural kinship, and I really felt Rob bring that to the performance that he was giving on the other side of the camera. And so at the pivotal moment in the film, which without giving too much away, when Linda realizes that her interests are not necessarily aligned with the interests of the documentary crew, it was so much more affecting to have it come from Rob. I really felt that in a very visceral way. And so I think it was a real masterstroke directorially on his part to know that he was the right person to be doing that for us off sides. And so, yeah, I think there was nobody I would have rather had to work opposite than Rob in those moments.
And how about for you, Keir?
Yeah, so I mean, in a weird way, I signed on to do this a long time before it actually came to fruition. And, Rob and I had talked about it, but for some reason, it didn't really click, at least by the time we actually got to set and we got to Hartford, that oh yeah, basically Rob is a character in this, and especially for my character, I thought a lot about like, his relationship with like James and Ruby's character, but I hadn't really thought about that relationship, and then so we had to kind of build that. But I mean, it's actually almost the most important relationship for Billy, because he's literally showing up, he's not wanted, they're trying to get him out of this movie, he's trying to wrestle control of it, he's trying to make his father look bad in the documentary, he kind of has disdain for the documentarians as well. So it was just really interesting. I feel like I did a lot of working with Robert, including him in the scenes, and like even he's always like, I'll have cigarettes whenever you want to bum cigarettes off me, or like fuck with the boom mic or whatever. Yeah, anyway, that was very interesting for me. I didn't expect to have so much to do with Rob, and he's a great scene partner, so thank you.
And Rob, I feel like part of how you also really set that up is by the little details, like lighting a scene 360 so that the actors could go in any direction. And it, like they were describing, it wasn't about hitting marks, and making sure that the production design team really dressed every single corner so that wherever the camera moved to, that it was still going to work. And so I just wanted to ask a little bit about like the meticulousness with those details in advance, and how that actually really allowed you a lot of freedom once you came to filming with the cast.
I think that was an essential facet of the movie, because although it looks like a 1960s period piece epic in some way, it's a super indie movie with a really low budget that we filmed the entirety of in 18 days. And what that means is, the actors don't have a ton of time to spend with the script, getting into character, or having conversations with me. So like the more we could create a world that felt totally lived in, three-dimensional, and real, in my conception at least, the quicker we could get into what we needed to do, the more realistic it would be that we would be able to finish everything on schedule, on budget, without going over. Because there was really no option to go over. There was no contingency. And so our production designer, Sonia Fotarsh, who is an incredible genius artist, agreed that we should just dress everything in 360. And her art department team and the prop master, Diego Cicano, really crafted these spaces. There's over 50 locations in the film. Crafted these spaces that felt lived in, period appropriate, and deeply personally nuanced to each of the characters. So there would be like drawers full of, whatever kind of ephemera would be in a drawer in a house in the 1960s. The actors could go in, and when we did these extended improvisational scenes, they would be able to, reach in and pick something up and use it as a piece of business. If the scenes are dressed 360, that means we have to light them 360. Adam did an amazing job with that with our gaffer, David Williamson. It was a lot of lighting with practicals and blasting light through windows. And it really, worked its way through every single department, this feeling of authenticity, as a means of expediting the entry point to feeling something grounded, all in service of the actors being able to, quickly access what they needed to access emotionally to give the characters three-dimensionality and nuance outside of a surface layer.
And Keir and Ruby, I also wanted to ask you both about your characters' relationships with the crew, because you were kind of touching upon how like they each have different motives for it, where Linda's like, hey, like, these are people that I should get to know, and maybe they'll be a part in helping me get to that next step in my artistic career. And for Billy, it's like, I can really use this as an opportunity to antagonize my dad and get back at him for some of the things that I'm resentful towards. And I feel like for both of them, they have those snap moments that you guys were both talking about, where it kind of changes and they realize like, actually, wait, like this isn't kind of working out exactly how I hoped. And I think what's so great in your performances is that there's those moments where we can see that they're very aware and very calculated with the cameras, and then the moments where they're kind of trying to push them away and they wish that they weren't there, and the awareness of it goes up and down. And so how did you set about finding the different motives and the different spaces of awareness?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think I thought a lot about how every time you set foot in front of a camera, even to an extent like right now, right? I have the illusion beforehand that I'm in control of what ends up being received by the audience. And that's just not true. You know, there's a tremendous amount of like trust and faith that goes into allowing yourself to be perceived in a recorded image, right? And so I think the entire relationship that the cast has to the camera crew is predicated on this idea of who is in control when they are in control. And are they correct in that assumption, or have they been deceived? And who is deceiving who? So, I mean, I think it's like a power struggle, right? Like what's interesting about like using documentary as a conceit or like an endpoint for telling this particular story. You have a lot of people who are grappling with finding their personal power, reclaiming their personal power, what that power feels like to them. Is it something that they derive from their career? Is it something that they derive from professional success or family or whatever? And so, I mean, I think for Linda, what's so like hard to read on the page, like when I got the script, I remember like feeling like really gut punched for her because she sees this as pure opportunity, and like all of the best possible outcomes for her exist in the beginning when she's meeting these people. And again, they are young artists closer to her in age in this place where she feels so isolated and so cut off from herself as an artistic person. The opportunity that they represent to her, and then sort of like her perception of the perversion of that intention being something that, like, for me, I wanted it to feel to the audience as it felt to me on the page, which was like I really felt the knife go in when she has that realization. And I think that was the most daunting challenge as an actor, was making sure that blow landed. And you know, I think it's what makes this film work. I think like every different character's relationship to the camera crew is so integral to the performance, even when it's not implicit. It's always underlying tension in every single moment. And so, yeah, I think that that is part of what makes the movie exciting and sort of sets it apart from other genre films.
Yeah, so I mean, I think like for Billy, it's an interesting shift because he really storms in and immediately kind of clocks what's going on. And I think again, I think he he's sort of trying to, the way I saw it, like use this as an opportunity to get his dad's attention. He's kind of throwing a temper tantrum. Um, and something you realize, like, you know, at first he's just like messing with them and trying to, you know, kind of drag his father, because he knows his father's always trying to present himself in this way that he doesn't feel is true. But I think it shifts, and by the end it's weird because he sort of, the only people he's really vulnerable in front of are the camera team. And there's kind of like a last scene, which we just did like an interview kind of thing where it's kind of the most vulnerable you get to see him in the movie, is with them. So he goes, it's a really interesting shift with his relationship with them. Yeah, and I think we kind of found it as we went too. Like I didn't really go into it expecting it to end that way. Yeah.
It's wonderful. And James, in playing Willie as well, I love all the facets in your performance and the way that you've captured him, because, you know, we see the showman when he first jumps on screen and he's so excited to show this camera crew everything in his house and his life. And, you know, then we start to see the flaws unearthed. But amongst it all, there's this real fragility and this childlike earnestness to him. And it feels like when he talks about his relationship with his dad, for example, and all the struggles with that, that kind of really still is a big part of him. And so I was just interested in how you wanted to bring the childlike earnestness and child self of him into the present day as much as who he is right now.
Yeah, I always felt that Willie was two types of a person. What he was inside the ring and what was he outside the ring. And if you put a camera in front of him now it's time for him to showboat and get back to that stardom, right? Meanwhile, in the real, we all know what's going on as an audience. His life is falling apart. He's got no money and just needs to get in and fight again. So the only thing that he knows how to do is get in that ring and win. He doesn't have the greatest relationship with his kids or any of his kids. And he's on his fourth wife. So, and you know, I always say this about Willie. I think the end of the movie, when he goes back and he gets to fight and he says, I need to fight. That's kind of really all he ever wanted to do the entire time, is get back and fight. So he kind of got what he wanted, didn't he? And I think that's why he smiles when he hits the canvas. His son is okay. He put him in a home. His father's gone, nothing you could do about that. His wife, who was becoming an issue for him, he couldn't afford it. He couldn't give her what she wanted. She was way too young for him. Probably wise behind her years for him. And I think she sort of started to see through him, left. So all the things that were problematic to him outside the ring were going away, right? And now he can kind of go clean slate. I'm going back to fight. I'm going back to what I know how to do. This, I think in some way, Willie had some demons. He had more demons than I think people can understand. And I could kind of somewhat relate to an upbringing, the way he was upbringing, where he's from, how he was raised, his parents, what people expect of you, his size, his stature, maybe some of the bullying and the fighting on the street, that builds you, that builds a character that people can never understand. So I related to that. I was doing something in my career that was different from anybody on the street. I was, sometimes made fun of for it, and I had to fight for everything that I ever had. So, I really related to Willie, and at times I felt bad for him, but to walk in the shadows and finally get this movie done after all these years and do it in Connecticut and have this amazing cast and crew, all these amazing creative people, go to Venice and be talking to you guys and have them on this channel right now. I mean, it's exciting. I'm very happy for everybody involved.
It's wonderful. And Robert, I also wanted to ask you about the filmmaking behind this a little bit more as well, because it's such a use of mixed mediums where you were filming both on digital and on film stock, and then also using 8mm, 16mm archival footage. And I love the fact that the editor that you worked with as well is a documentary editor himself. And we just wanted to ask a little bit more about some of the filmmaking and just that use of mixed media.
Yeah, there was an idea initially to shoot the entire thing on 16mm, but the more I thought about this construct of weaving in improvisation, it became incredibly cost prohibitive. So Adam and I did a ton of research into what camera will allow us to have the sort of like body language of the cameras indicative of this time, which were things like the Oricon camera. It's like a legendary first crystal sync character developed by Richard Leacock. And we settled on the Auraflex Alexa Mini, which has a sensor that could be reallocated to a super 16mm size, which means that we could use period lenses from the 1960s. So we could really mimic the field of view and type of depth of field that you would see in these kinds of films. While doing that, there's several portions in the film that take place in the 1940s, which are archival scenes. We decided to shoot those archival scenes on celluloid, so they're all shot on Super 16, and one of them has Super 8 woven into it from an audience perspective. And I think that allowed us, it allowed us to more convincingly reverse engineer the look of the archival fights, which we already had access to. And then in editing, we used these archival fights for our wides and the 16mm shots for our close-ups. So you'll see the real Willie Pep fighting in a wide shot, Madison Square Garden, tens of thousands of people in the stands, and then cut to a close-up of James Madio, but texturally, everything matches, everything feels organic, everything is, silver halcyon crystals bouncing around on celluloid. And that just helps sell the effect, right? On top of that, there is a rhythmic truth to the way in which direct cinema films are cut. And, deeply, deeply privileged that we had Robert Greene as our editor, who is an incredible documentary filmmaker. I've shot on his past 3 films, and for my money, he's the best documentary editor who's working today. Best editor, period. I mean, he's an amazing collaborator, and he really, after cameras stopped rolling, spent the time with me, nearly a year, cutting the picture. There would be days where we would not argue, but, impassionately discuss really 2 or 3 frames. And we would spend the entire day just talking about 2 or 3 frames, rhythmically, why they should be there or should not be there. every decision had justification. And the reason why this process is important is because if you cannot justify something, it should not be in the film. And so if it's worth fighting for, then it's in the film. And if it's not worth fighting for, concede, remove it from the film, glance it away. And this is how we got the film to be tight up to fighting weight, if we're going to use a silly boxing metaphor, which I already regret. But yeah. What else? What else is in there? You know, Robert and I looked at a lot of films of the period and sort of observed editing techniques that were used. So Frederick Wiseman, for example, will do a thing where he'll show you like 2 wide shots that last like twice, 3 times as long as you think they should, and then cut into like a close-up shot that is like 3 seconds long. You're like, what was that? And what it does is it creates a visual illusion that entices the audience and recenters them. If you're engaged in watching nonfiction, you need these kind of like percussive beats to hit, because then you become re-engaged, because you're moving quickly, we're jumping from subject to subject, and we don't have the safety net of the typical adherence to narrative beats if we're trying to make this feel as organic as possible. So we needed to hold on to something. And Robert was really willing to take that long walk down the short pier with me.
It's wonderful. The filmmaking is so beautiful and cinematic on this, and I absolutely loved all of your performances. So congratulations on a fantastic film, and thank you so much for sharing all of this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I miss and love you guys. See you soon.